Welcome to Strange Stories with the Seeker and the Skeptic. It is Halloween, people. It is my favorite holiday. And I'm going to be honest with you. When we were deciding on what day of the week to choose to put out our episodes, I advocated for Tuesday because I knew Halloween was on a Tuesday this year and I wanted an episode to come out on Halloween. So here we are. This is the episode. We got a lot to talk about today. We're super excited. So we're going to tell a couple of current events going on with Jonathan and myself. Then we have some stories that our listeners have sent in to us that we're going to talk about. And then we also have some local ghost stories. So got a lot planned. Very excited here. You guys can't see, but Jonathan is dancing. He's super excited too. He hasn't said a word yet.
A word yet.
There he is.
Nobody who knows me will ever believe you if you tell them that I am dancing. They're just not going to believe it.
I have the video to prove it. So if anybody wants to call my bluff, there is no bluff. It's real.
Halloween is definitely my favorite day. I always liked basically like the beginning of September to like the day after Thanksgiving here in the US is always, the third Thursday of November for our international listeners. I'm sure we have a few. Just the best part of the year. It's always, the temperatures are always around what I enjoy. Leaves are turning colors if you're in a state or a region that has, actual leaves that do that. If you're in the Carolinas, then it's still green because it's always green.
Yeah, this time of year is my favorite time of year as well. For a lot of different reasons. I just love the energy of fall. I love the fall foliage and all the colors. I like that the temperature is getting a little cooler. And I do feel like, energetically speaking, it has just a different feeling than other times of year. And perhaps that's because the veil is thinner. That's what people talk about. The veil between this dimension and other dimensions or the spiritual realm is thinner. And I'd really like to know why. I don't know why. I don't know if people know why. But it's something that is just very interesting to me.
Yeah, definitely. I feel obviously feel the same way. So probably gonna go into stuff that's been happening with us recently next. So we're recording this on Saturday, October the 28th, 2023. Gonna release it on October 31st because that's what Halloween is. Last night at about this morning, I guess it was about 4 this morning. It was definitely still dark outside. I was awakened by what I first told myself was a remnant of a dream that just was still in my head because I was definitely in our bed and you were asleep. Brittany was asleep, and I sleep on the right side of the bed, and I looked over to the door. This also to the right of the bed, and standing beside our bed, just kind of looking at me, was what I would call what came into my head was just the words dark man. And you call it a shadow person, call it whatever you want. I would guess around 6 feet tall, slender, and just like an absence of light. Like there was not really a form, really, like not like super like defined. You couldn't see like any kind of defining anything. Um, So, clearly I just thought I was still asleep, or it was, a remnant of my dream. I know I was having a strange dream. I've had a series of very strange dreams, all of which I've known at the time I was dreaming, but they were still real to me. And it's been going on since we started watching Hellier and Twin Peaks, and doing the podcast stuff. And I've started back into reading esoterica. I've been doing a lot of reading of of these types of things, and listening to a whole lot of podcasts. Some of my favorites recently have been Pennyroyal, obviously, because we've mentioned Pennyroyal before, but also Conspiranormal and Vase. Vase has been super interesting to me. We both listened to some episodes, but I'm actually going from episode one all the way to current. Um, and why I bring up podcasts, other than the fact that it's interesting, and we are a podcast, and we, suggest other people listen to other interesting things in this realm, is that Base has their episode 21, which they have titled Song of the Dark Man, which I had not seen that title until I clicked on it this afternoon on my afternoon walk. Um, I just now realized it was titled Song of the Dark Man, by the way. That did not really
Mm.
dawn on me till just now. It's an interview they did with Dara Mason. I'm probably pronouncing his first name wrong, and I apologize if I am. He is the host of the podcast Spirit Box, which I'm nowhere near current with, but I've listened to a few episodes and really enjoyed the few that I've listened to. And they mentioned a few episodes that I need to listen to, because apparently he is very involved in this idea of what these folks are calling the Dark Man, which for these guys seems to have connections to a powerful occult force of some kind. Mr. Mason makes some goes through some conclusions that I'm personally not comfortable with, because I don't have the same kind of background as him. So that's where my brand of skepticism is. I want more information, and so that kind of triggers my brand of skepticism of I believe that these folks have had the experiences that they say they have. I'm not sure about their conclusions, but I'm not discounting them either. But the end product with him, and maybe with the base gentleman as well. I would something definitely I'd be super curious to talk to Mr. High and Mr. Bucky about, is where they actually land on conclusions for this stuff. But the idea of being a powerful energy force that kind of appears to you if you're going on a path that you're supposed to be going on. There's some idea of maybe a loose version of fate, or having a path you're supposed to take, and the more you're on the path, the more likely you are to experience those things. I know that with my family, really both sides of my family have long histories of seeing things like shadow people, seeing energy entities in the corners of their eyes that are dark looking to us. And for context, there's no like philosophical skew on this for me. I don't mean dark as in like negative or bad, and I don't think those guys do either. This podcast is not it. The base guys are not saying anything's negative or bad or evil or anything. Just the actual physical visible spectrum on this stuff is darker, as opposed to being a shining light of some kind. And I definitely want to do more reading and more listening about things like this. I'd like to have some conversations with some people that have experienced these types of things, maybe got some better perspective than me. Definitely I'm listening. I'm interested, um, and definitely appreciative of the folks at base, and also Mr. Mason and everybody else who's doing this kind of work, because it definitely makes me feel less alone, less lost, if that makes
Mhm.
sense. So
Yeah.
Brittany, what do you think of this? What's your take?
Well, I think it's interesting because this whole morning you were trying to convince yourself it was just a dream and that there was nothing else to it. And then there
It
was
sure
some pretty,
was.
you sure were. And then there were some pretty interesting synchronicities. You listened to that podcast, and I mean, you were talking about, I don't, weren't you talking about a book that this is mentioned in as well that people have been talking about?
So that specific thing, to my knowledge, is not mentioned.
Oh,
But
okay.
I did, um, Amazon suggested a book for us, which I just randomly purchased because it sounded interesting. I felt like I had heard about it before. It's called The Tincture and the Paranormal, um, by a man named Hanson, and so I bought it, and it came like in a day because Amazon is, a monolith, and they're able to get you things as soon as you think about them, basically. And then within 12 hours of that, receiving it, I listened to a Vase episode that mentions and suggests getting that book, and then also a Right Where You're Sitting Now episode that also suggests getting that book and talks about that book. And so, that was super interesting to me that, after being presented with it and just being like, yeah, yeah, I'll do this. I'll get this. These two podcasting entities that I respect a whole lot and really enjoy suggested that people, read this book.
Yeah. I've known for a while that there is something here. There's been some strange things happening since we kind of fell down this rabbit hole. I would say in the last couple of weeks, I'm seeing more shadow figures, even flashes of light. Like, so it's not always like dark, um, like you said, dark colored energy. Sometimes I'm seeing flashes of light as well. And the other night I was reading in bed and you were on the computer in the other room, and all of a sudden I just saw a dark shadow that was like perfectly in the shape of a hand kind of slide out in front of me in front of the book that I was reading. So it's just like this hand shadow in front of the pages I was reading, and it was very strange, and I did kind of acknowledge it. It was like, can you not, please? And it went away. Um, I we've talked about this a lot. We don't get the sense that if there, is something here that it's dark or malevolent. I do get the sense though it's trying to get our attention. Just certain things that have happened. That hand thing, I mean, that's like, don't even read, like look at me. I'm right here, right?
Right.
The lights in the bathroom, leaving the cupboards open, those types of things. It feels kind of like, pay attention. I'm here. Notice me. I'm not sure about you sleeping and like kind of seeing that. I'm not sure if that was intentional or you just woke up at the right time, but you kind of felt like that it was a, I mean, you said it a few minutes ago, but like it was a carryover from your dream. So were you dreaming of a shadow finger and then woke up and saw something?
I think so, yes.
Okay.
Either that or I woke up twice and don't realize the first time was actually just me waking up and seeing something. Because you know how it is when you're just out of sleep, it does take you a couple seconds to kind of recalibrate to reality. And that's always been super true for me. My dreams have always been, vivid and weird. More so at the times of my life when I've acknowledged, kind of paranormal or occult type things, and less when I've done things to not acknowledge that stuff. But this is definitely the most um and the most prolonged time frame that I've we've been doing this since June basically, doing this type of stuff. And it's always I've always kind of, when I've done this stuff in the past, kind of had these feelings that it wasn't the right time in my life yet, so I've gone off to do other things. This time it does feel like the right time in my life, so I've kind of pulled out all the stops on consuming this stuff. And my dreams definitely have amped up, I think in reaction to that, whether that's my subconscious just kind of trying to make sense of things, or if there's something more to that, I don't know. Jury is still out for me. That's another place where my skepticism still, clicks in and says, "Hey, don't make a conclusion yet. Get more information."
Mhm.
Which is why I'm continuing to listen to more podcasts of people who um, are taking these things seriously and going through, similar journeys and have gone down these paths before me. So I can see what has helped them, what has seemed to not help them, and no guarantee that it's going to be the same for me. Everything seems to be different for everybody, but maybe it'll help me make good decisions.
Yep, absolutely. So there you have it, people. We have some shadows with us. We're just, just exploring.
But for what it's worth, in my late teens to early 20s, or really my mid teens until my mid 20s, honestly, um, I had a lot of weird experiences, and I was surrounded by a lot of negative people throughout those parts of my life, and I think that's why I had a lot of negative occult style
Yeah.
experiences, because I think that the things that you present yourself around are the things that you're going to see. So, when we go into this stuff and we set that, call it setting an intention, call it whatever you want. When we say, hey, we'll accept good results. We want to go through this stuff, but we want good results for this stuff. And I didn't know to do that when I was younger. And so
Yeah.
I felt a lot of negative stuff, and I saw some scary things. And I'm sure in future podcasts we'll dive into that. This is not really the time for that, but strange things did happen. I know what bad energy feels like. I know what a bad thing feels like. None of this feels like that to me. I have
Yeah.
no feeling of, there's nothing ominous. There's nothing out to get us. There's, I don't have any kind of, there's nothing scary here.
Yeah. I think about it in terms of matching frequencies. And so if we are in a frequency that is, call it what you want, a higher vibration, a faster vibration, whatever, right? We're more towards the love and light end of the spectrum, right? So that means what we resonate with would be beings that are more in the frequency of love and light, right? If you're in a darker place, if you're depressed, if you're just not in a good vibrate, or I don't want to say good vibration, but if you're in a darker place, you are more likely to resonate with maybe darker entities. We listened to that whole the podcast The Chilling, where this girl was in college and she lived in a house that was possessed by a demon, basically. And I think a lot of her experiences had to do with who she was as a person, just being more open and being a medium. But also, she was in a really dark place when she moved into that house. She had just gotten out of like an abusive relationship where this guy tried kidnapping her and killing her. So she was in a dark space. So to me, and it kind of latched onto her, and probably a lot of that, in my opinion, anyways, is because of the energetic space she was in. What do you think about that, though?
I mean, yeah, I 100% think that, that there are potentially, and whether this is an interdimensional thing or whether this really is, somebody that was around whose energy is still with us, or something different that I've never heard of before. Something is there in some places, and some of them are things that are not curious about people at all and just want to be left alone. And some of them are very curious about humans. Some of them are positive and want to mess with you in a positive way. And some of them seem to be hateful. And I think that in that with that specific podcast, which did you mention the name?
Yeah, The
Oh yeah.
Chilling.
With with the chilling, I think that the house that's mentioned there, and hey, if you guys want to go on a wild ride, listen to that podcast.
Hmm.
It's very interesting. The production value is great.
Yeah.
She does a real good job. She definitely did her research. I don't know if I agree with some of the conclusions a few of her guests came to, but hey, that's me. I've got a different experience than those guys. No, that's not a problem. That doesn't take away for me from the experience of listening to the story. But whatever is or was or might be in that specific house likes messing with humans in a bad way.
Mm-hmm.
And she caught the brunt of it more than anybody else she talked to. And I think that Brittany's right. I think it's because she had just been in a situation where she had been physically assaulted quite a lot. She could have died, and that'll mess with you. And I think it'll mess with you more if you're someone who is, you know, to kind of, for me, it always comes back to John Keel somehow, more connected to that super spectrum of energy, and has, more ability to see those higher and lower frequencies than most people for whatever reason. Then she was just ripe for the picking on that. And
Mm-hmm.
she's lucky to, in my opinion, have gotten out of that situation.
For sure. Luckily, that's not what we're dealing with here.
No, I don't
So
think it is at all.
only love and light in this house. That is the only thing. I do a lot of visualization and protection and setting intentions, and that is all that is allowed here. So
Yep. We are looking for and will only accept positive outcomes.
absolutely. All right. So we have some ghost stories that people sent in to us. So thank you to our listeners who sent us some of your stories. We're very excited to share them with you. The first one we have is from my friend Melissa, and she was a member of a women's circle group that I had when I lived in New York a couple years ago, which was a lot of fun. I missed that a lot, but this story is both, I would say, sad and sweet. So Melissa lost her son Brian in October of 2005. He was 17 years old and he was killed by a drunk driver, which is just heartbreaking and tragic. However, in 2017, her daughter was renting a home very close to where her son was buried. And her grandson, who was 3.5 at the time, was playing, and he was talking as though he was speaking to somebody. So Melissa says, my daughter Skylar asked him who he was talking to, and Andrew replied, to my friend. He said, you should take me for ice cream. My daughter laughed and asked him what his friend's name was. He replied, Brian, which was her son's name, Melissa's son's name. Brian died 8 years before Andrew was born, so he didn't know him. My daughter got a little freaked out, so she sent me a text of what had happened. I told her to ask more direct questions, so she went back to Andrew and asked if his friend Brian knew Mimi. Andrew laughed and said, of course he does. She's his mama. A few years later, after they had moved to Texas, Andrew asked his mother if she remembered the house in New York. She said yes. He said, I wonder what happened to the man who always followed Dad around the house. So here we have it. Another story about a kid in connection with spirit. So I just love this story, and I'm so thankful to Melissa for sharing it with us. I'm sure that probably gave her a lot of comfort, just knowing like her son was around. I mean, he was making jokes, take take my nephew out for ice cream, which is just very sweet. So I love this story.
Oh yeah, that's a really good story. I'm never surprised to hear someone talk about their kid or themselves as a kid, having some kind of contact experience of some kind, because when you're 3, nobody's told you nothing's impossible yet. And so, no, there's no 3-year-old trying to convince themselves that the things that they're seeing are not what they're actually seeing,
Mhm.
you know,
And
which,
it's not scary at that time either, right? Like
yeah,
you haven't been
because anything
conditioned to
could be
think it's
possible,
scary. Yeah.
you know, anything can be possible when you're 3.5.
Yep.
And I mean, that just goes back to earlier this morning when I was trying to convince myself that I didn't see what I saw. I was trying to say, well, that was a dream. And I even framed it to you when I told you about it as, hey, listen to this weird dream I had last night. And
Yeah.
you're like, that's not a dream. That happened. I'm like, no. And then I listen to that podcast later. I'm like, okay, so I guess that was not a dream. Here we are.
Here we are.
Now, why I wanted that to be a dream, I don't know. Who knows? But here we are. That's a really good story. So we are very stoked that we had some friends of the show send in some stories. Russell Lister is a guy I've played cards with for years and years. We've known each other for a while. Super fun dude. Has been a avid supporter of the show from the beginning, 3 whole months ago. And he's been, I would consider him to be probably our biggest fan. And I was super stoked when he sent us an email with this story. And man, this is a wild one. So let me change screens. You can cut out that part.
He said it was okay to say his name.
Yeah, he said it was cool.
Okay.
He's no worries. Um, so I'm just gonna read it like him. So first off, I'd like to say I consider myself a cautious skeptic. I don't believe in anything really like spirits, gods, or cryptids, but I do keep a wicker broom by the front door just in case hate's are real. In the summer of either 2000 or 2001, my family would spend a lot of time at my stepuncle's house out in Pulaski County. As far as I know, Tiny, that's my stepuncle, was the first owner of that house. It was a nice, newer suburb. At the time, I was about 10 years old. My cousins were probably 12 or 13. The adults would typically go out and leave us kids at the house alone. Most of the time, we would play video games, watch movies, and smoke stolen cigarettes. One night, all the adults decided they were going to the Moose Lodge, and they'd be gone for a while. Tiny told us to behave and don't do anything stupid, and they all drove off. Immediately, we turned on HBO, just looking for anything we weren't supposed to be watching. And as the night went on, it just a typical rowdy time. We were laughing and playing, and suddenly there was a scraping noise going down the side of the house. It sounded like clouds tearing at the walls. We ran from the living room and down the hall into a bedroom, and the noise followed us. We ran back out to the living room, and the noise stopped. Uncle Tony was a tow truck driver, and he had one of those high-powered spotlight flashlights in the kitchen. My braver, older cousin got it and looked out the windows and didn't see anything. We finally got the courage to all go outside and check the house, and nothing was wrong with it. Chalking up to a bear making a ruckus, we went back in, settled down, and started a movie. Probably a movie we shouldn't have been watching at the age we were. It was at this time we heard a voice go down the hall. Hey, guys. It was Uncle Tiny, shirtless in a bath towel. And he looked like he was in pain. He said, I know what y'all are doing, and that's fine. Just keep it down. I got a migraine. We were confused because we thought he was out with everyone else, but we apologized and he went back into the bedroom. About an hour later, all the adults got back and we looked out the window to see Uncle Tiny had been the one driving. We were all floored. My older cousin ran to the bedroom and yelled, There's nobody in here. When they came in, we questioned them to no end, and they all said they all left together and no one came back. And yeah, Tiny was the one driving. This has never sat right with me. It's always given me a weird feeling. I have since talked to those cousins as grown-ups, and we all remember it exactly the same way. They both have admitted to me also they have weird feelings about it. Like, obviously, it couldn't be the ghost of a living person, but what was it? Who was it?
That's wild. I mean, to me, it almost sounds like a doppelganger, right?
Absolutely.
So, I mean, a doppelganger is like, I don't know exactly what it's supposed to be, but it's like, you know, it looks like a person who was alive, but it's not.
Yeah. It's somebody who is somewhere that they can't be, and then they're not there anymore.
Yeah.
And the lore goes to say, like, if you take from the original German lore, if you see your own doppelganger, then you're going to die. Like, that's like the thought process. But there's nothing specifically ominous that I've ever read or heard about seeing someone else's doppelganger. But just, it's just one of those situations where somebody is in a place that they literally cannot
Hmm.
be, often interacting with people, and then disappearing. Which for me kind of is, at least thought form adjacent in a way. Um, I don't really know. I really do appreciate that Russell did send us a story. This is that's crazy.
It is. Yeah, I mean, thought form adjacent, or is it like meshing timelines, like that did happen in a timeline, but then they kind of veered back to a different one. Who knows? I don't know. But I know something similar happened to my dad. I wanted him to talk about it when we did the interview, but he didn't bring it up. So I might be butchering the story a little bit, but he told us, I think I was still a teenager. He was laying in bed and he was like talking to my mom and seeing her in the bathroom, and then like all of a sudden she walks in the bedroom door. So she wasn't in the bathroom at that time. And that's just, a wild, again, that says to me like doppelganger, but what is that really? I don't know.
Not a clue. That's super interesting.
It is. All right. So our next story comes from my mom, and we have our first prejudicial ghost story.
Oh
So,
no.
oh no, that's even more terrifying than any ghost. But so my mom says, you probably know that Aunt Lori and Uncle Jim, which are their best friends, live in what used to be her grandparents' house. When Aunt Lori's mother was single, she was seeing a young Italian man. For whatever reason, her father hated Italians. He told her, I would rather see you come home in a coffin than for you to marry an Italian. So Aunt Lori was telling us the story as we were painting her kitchen, getting them ready to move into that house. As you know, Uncle Jim is 100% Italian. So I said, I wonder what Grandpa would think if he knew an Italian was moving into his house. No sooner than the words came out of my mouth, a shelf in the kitchen came crashing down with everything on it. So I said, well, I guess we know what he thinks.
Weird dislike.
I
Like,
know.
they're all weird. Like there's
Yeah.
no like
Prejudice.
prejudicial thing that
Yeah.
makes sense to me, but like specifically that one thing, I'll just never understand.
Yeah. I mean, it was a different time frame. I don't know. I'm pretty sure, I could be wrong about this. I'm pretty sure they're French. So I don't know if that was part of the beef. Not
Yeah,
exactly
maybe
sure.
there's some like generations long, you know, animosity between French people and Italian people that I'm just
Italians.
not aware of because I am not connected to either of those like, bloodlines. Not
Yeah.
I don't understand, any kind of prejudice on any, other than like, billionaire versus everybody else. That's a
Hmm.
prejudice I can get behind. But like, beyond that, none of it ever makes sense to me. That's a funny story though.
Yeah.
I would be annoying to have to clean up after that.
Yeah.
It's like,
For
all right, well,
sure.
you made your point, now clean up. Like,
Yeah. Yeah. That's an interesting one. And I know that my Aunt Lori and Uncle Jim have had other experiences there. I'm not entirely sure of all of the experiences they've had, but that's the one my mom at least witnessed, which is a pretty funny story.
for sure. Okay, next up we have got a story from an anonymous listener. We definitely appreciate the submission of, and we definitely will always honor people's requests not to be named. Um, is a lady that we know. As a preteen or teenager, my sister and I shared a room. At night, usually when she or I was away or at a friend's, the other one was sleeping alone in our bedroom. You would hear what sounded like someone sitting on the other's bed. It would make the hair stand up on my neck. I always just told myself it was the mattress settling, although it happened once in my early 20s with my boyfriend at the time there, and he froze in bed and asked, what was that? No one was there when we turned on the light. Anyway, eventually, besides just the bed popping, our radios, we had alarm clock radios, would make crackling sounds that steadily got louder and louder until suddenly going silent. I always blamed that on electrical issues, but it creeped me out. And one night, it happened and the radio was unplugged. We would
Ooh.
also hear footsteps in the hallway on some nights. Luckily, this has not happened at my parents' house in recent years, but seriously creeped us out as teenagers. I found it weird. We experienced these strange sounds and events because my parents' house was not old. It was built in 1997. However, I wonder if it was a ghost who might have been attached to an old item in our home since my mom collected old furniture. When my sister moved away to college, she took her antique dresser and she experienced weird events in her apartment, such as the radio coming on and things moving all throughout her room. Sounds like it's time to get rid of that dresser.
There's a lot of similarities. This listener and I have talked recently between the things we experience. My parents' house was built, her parents' house was built. We both have sisters, we both shared a room, and weird things happened. What is going on?
Well, I'm, sitting here and I've got a little box here that I'm showing the camera like somebody can see something that's full of pens and it's on
Yeah,
my desk.
yeah.
And next thing I know, it was on the floor. It just kind of went on the floor. Another thing here is a little old pocket knife that my camera doesn't want to focus on. Well, not that we actually use those videos, but an old pocket knife that I believe came from my father's belongings after he passed a couple of years back.
Interesting. Do you think your dad's sending you a message right now?
Probably not, but hey, who knows? I try not to draw any real conclusions. I'm
Did
not
you
ruling
see
it
it
out.
fall?
Oh yeah, I just watched it fall. It just happened.
It like
Now, to be fair, it was on top of my printer. I did move my printer a little while ago. Maybe I moved it in a way that made it unstable and it just took that long for gravity to make it fall over. I don't know. That was about an hour ago when I moved my printer over a little bit. So, you know, I'm not going to make any real determinations there.
Hey.
Good times.
So yeah, as we're doing this, strange things are happening, Could be normal, could be maybe not. Who
Nobody
knows?
knows.
Nobody knows. Okay. So now we're going to talk about some local ghost stories. Um, there is there's two apparitions that a lot of people have seen where I'm from.
Which
And
is
Oswego, New York.
okay.
And so they call it the Seneca Hill Ghosts, and how it is seen, and it's usually like it's often in November when people see. I think it's like the end of October into November, around that time period. And what they see is a young woman, maybe in her 30s, and a little girl who's like between like 6 and 8. They're in their nightgowns and they're running down the road terrified. So this has been seen and reported by a lot of people. I have not seen this, but I have heard lots of stories of people who have seen this in the same area at night. So what's interesting is I've heard different reasons why these ghosts exist. So what I was told throughout my entire childhood was their house was on fire, and so they were running away from the fire trying to get help. That was the story I always knew. And then I believe I was probably like in my early 20s, it was after college. There was an event in October called Tales of the Haunted Harbor, and our local historian would go down to the harbor and she would just tell local ghost stories. And so she was telling the story of the Seneca Hill ghosts, and what she had said that night was that had something to do with they were in a religious cult and that they had committed suicide, which was the first time I had heard that version of the story. I couldn't remember all the details, so preparing for this, I did a little research, and what was reported is that the woman had reportedly jumped from a barn window. She threw herself to death on October 22nd, 1844, because the Armageddon prediction did not come true. So this is from a local website called the Oswegonian. So I'm like, what was the 1844 Armageddon prediction? And what I found was something called the Great Disappointment. So essentially, a Baptist preacher, his name was William Miller. He led the Millerites. He predicted that the coming of Christ was going to happen in 1844, and he set like a cutoff date, like it had to happen between October 22nd, 1844. So on Wikipedia, it says, when Jesus did not appear by October 22nd, 1844, Miller and his followers were disappointed.
Well, I would
Hence,
be disappointed too.
hence the great disappointment. So the story that I heard at Tales of the Haunted Harbor and what the Oswegonian is reporting is that the woman was a Millerite and that she had killed herself. Um, and I guess her child too, because the apocalypse didn't happen. Um, I do remember Rosemary Nesbitt saying like there was a group of them who had all killed themselves. So it wouldn't have just been this woman and her child. However, as I'm like, again, thinking about the story, thinking about the origins, I'm like, does this make any sense? Because what's seen is this woman and a child are like running away from something in terror. So, like, that doesn't seem fitting. I mean, it seems a little bit more fitting for like a house fire, but regardless, it just didn't make a lot of sense to me. So, as I'm again doing research, a new story emerges that I had never heard before. Um, that is very dark but interesting. So this is actually reported in the New York Times from June 25th, 1898. And basically what it says is that on Seneca Hill, a young woman and her 6-year-old daughter may be the ghost of a man named William Cooper's family. So legend has it that Cooper came home drunk in the spring of 1898. He shot at his wife during an argument but missed. And so she grabbed her daughter. They ran to a nearby home. And that Cooper tracked them down, shot the neighbor, but he did not kill his wife. And then he committed suicide. So that is a very interesting story. I'd never heard that before. Seems like kind of the right time period. It happened in the right location. Makes a little bit more sense somewhat of why like you would see the older woman and the young girl running away in terror. But what's interesting is they didn't die. So it just leaves more questions to me of
Yeah.
like, why are these apparitions appearing? And if that is the genuine story, like I said, that one makes the most sense to me. Is it just like that was such a traumatic event that that energy got stuck there and it's just being replayed? I don't know, but it's interesting. Um, a lot of people, like I said, have seen this mother-daughter duo. Sometimes, most of the time, they see her on Seneca Hill or at the bottom of Seneca Hill. Um, but they've also reported seeing her like across the river. So like right there at Seneca Hill, the Oswego River's right there. And so on the other side, people have seen them as well. So that's interesting
Mm-hmm.
that they're not always appearing in the same spot. Um, but yeah, I don't know. There's, like I said, there's a New York Times article talking about this murder suicide that happened. Um, and it's interesting because like I said, I've heard the fire story, I heard the Miller Wright story. I've never heard anyone talk about this Cooper guy. So if any of my Oswego peeps are listening and you have heard this story, comment, reach out to us because I'm really interested if other people have heard this version of the Seneca Hill ghost story as well.
Yeah, super interested for sure. Yeah, I just want to note that if your religion is named after a person, you are in a cult. And definitely that is a cult. It's part of that's like cult 101. Is your religion named after a person? Is that person alive? If the answers are yes, you are in a cult.
You are in a cult.
That
I
was
just want to understand like why so many people have predicted, the apocalypse happening. Like why is that the thing we're latching on to, Mr. Miller?
there. There's about 8 hours of talking that I could do about this,
We don't
and I
have that
don't think
kind
we
of
have that
time.
kind of time. But it comes from, in a nutshell, a medievalist mindset. And there's a lot that can be said about that. People have devoted entire lifetimes to talking about these types of things.
So you have a ghost story local to Roanoke. So I'd like to
Yeah,
hear this one.
it's more of a snippet of a story. We recently the one of our local television stations did like a little almost fluff piece about this because I guess it's getting closer to Halloween. They're reaching for what they can. So for those who don't know, Brittany and I live in Roanoke, Virginia. We're in southwestern Virginia, kind of the gateway to southwestern Virginia. It's the largest city in this part of the state. And I've been here for about 18 years. Brittany's just under a year. And in the entire time I've lived here, I don't think I've ever heard anyone tell a story of anything weird happening here. I've had maybe a single weird experience myself. And I don't know that any of the people I've talked to have ever given me anything to go on in Roanoke itself. Um, this is from 1902, and it's something that was experienced in Roanoke and Lynchburg, which is close to us, and then south of us, you've got Tazewell and Bristol and Bluefield, and so basically all within an hour to 2 hours of the Roanoke area, this was seen, and they're calling it. One second, sorry, cut out this part. Huh. They're just calling it the Woman in Black, and basically, in downtown areas in these towns and cities, a woman was seen wearing all black with a black head covering, a black face covering, by apparently multiple men were saw this person, this apparition, um, and there's a string of basically old newspaper articles from 1902 spanning about 9 months, kind of tracking this. One thing that kind of not the best reporting on the part of our local television station, but specifically says the ghostly figure would follow men home late at night with articles reporting bullets flying through her unharmed and her ability to disappear suddenly. And there's a quote here that says, "All these men are reputable." It really does make you think, this had a certain realness to it, that this is like actually legitimate experiences that these men are having. Well, I'm going to tell you guys a little bit about the history of Roanoke, Virginia in the late 1800s to the probably the 1930s or so. Downtown Roanoke, Virginia, especially in the southwest side, was known in the region as being the place to go get in trouble at night. That's where the bars were. That's where the brothels were. As a matter of fact, until from the mid 30s until about 8 years ago, there was a statute in Roanoke City that banned and made against the law boarding houses. You weren't legally were not allowed to rent a room out to someone because of the brothels and because of all of the violence that came with brothels in Roanoke. They had to get that overturned so that people could do Airbnb and similar apps in the Roanoke area. And until that, you weren't allowed to do that. So don't know if reputable in 1902 in Roanoke and downtown is really what I would call the people who would be out frequenting these places, for one thing. And for another, are we really not going to remark on the bullets flying through
Yeah.
her? They tried to shoot her.
Yeah.
She
I
could just be some
know.
lady, like just happened to
Yeah.
be going through town and just getting shot by these dudes going
That's
to
your
these
first
brothels.
response.
Yeah.
We're gonna
So
shoot this lady.
come on, Channel 7. I think you can do a little better on the respectable journalism angle. But still, interesting that multiple people in multiple places had these reports, especially in a part of the state, because a lot of Virginia has, there's a history of Virginia of ghost stories, a lot of ghost stories, a lot of lights in the sky, a lot of missing people who never come back or come back and can't explain where they were, except for the Roanoke area, which has always seemed a little strange to me. So if
Hmm.
you happen to be listening to this and you're in the Roanoke area and you have had some experiences, please reach out. We'd love to talk to you. I specifically would love to talk to you. That it just does not seem to be here. And as someone who grew up in North Carolina, a little bit of a tangent, but whatever. Um, Experiencing strange things my entire time growing up in North Carolina, and everyone I know in North Carolina has got stories. It really just seems like it's a dead zone here, and I'd be curious to know why.
It's very interesting that, you know, it doesn't seem like there's a lot of stories. I'm wondering if, just us going down this road, if maybe we will hear some more, or if there really is something that, there just isn't a lot of like that kind of activity happening here. Um, I did an event last weekend that was a holistic fair, and so I was talking to one of the other vendors there, and she was a transplant like me, so not native to this area, and she had remarked that Roanoke was drawing in spiritual seekers, which I think is interesting.
Huh.
She's like, there's a lot of us migrating here. So I don't know. I don't know if there's any connection. Could be completely unrelated. It just popped into my brain when you said that, like that there's not a lot of haunting activity happening here.
I've never known anyone to say any strange lights in the sky here either.
Yeah.
Which coming from the Carolinas is weird. Because in Carolinas you look up any random Tuesday and you might see something that you don't have a flight planned for.
Yeah. Which is very interesting. So our next story is a story from my sister Erin, and we're going to let her tell it to us herself. So listen up.
So, the story that I wanted to share for this lovely spooky season takes us back to a time when I was in high school. I don't know, I think it was maybe 10th or 11th grade. I'm not exactly sure. But, anyways, my bestie growing up, Abby, was spending the night, and we had gone to bed, and I woke up, and there was this giant gray and black eyeball, like a single eyeball. I'm trying to think how big it was. It was really big. It was bigger than any of the dogs we had at the time, than the Sheltie. Well, we didn't have a Sheltie then. But anyways, it was big. And it was just kind of floating near me above, like mid-air, not over the bed, but like next to the bed. And I just remember screaming, and I had this like star pillow. It was like in the shape of a star, and it was stuffed, and I like flung it across the room, jumped out of bed, ran to the front of the bed, stood up like on the edge of like where the footboard would be, kind of thing, and just did a face plant straight down into my pillows. Now, of course, this obviously startled Abby a bit, and myself included. Um, at the time, I didn't really know what it was or what it was from, and it really had freaked me out because, I mean, I always would make jokes about Big Brother watching and everything, but there was literally a giant gray and black eyeball floating near me while I was sleeping. But since I've grown up and, researched and learned things a bit, I wonder if it could have been Archangel Metatron, who I know my sister Brittany the Seeker and I have discussed about it, about Metatron showing up as an eyeball, and I know that kind of freaked her out in the past, and I understand why. I don't know if it was him or not. Maybe I should meditate on it, but yeah, that was just one of the many, what do you call it? Strange, spooky stories from our house growing up. And of course, there's a lot of different paranormal experiences, but that one was particularly strange. So I would like to think now that it was an archangel looking over me instead of something creepier. But who knows? I'll let you know if I find out anything, if I meditate on it.
So, Jonathan, what do you think of Aaron's story?
Well, I think that I would move. If that was a thing that happened to me, I would find a way to live anywhere other than where I was living, because that, I'm not sure I could sleep there again ever in my
Yeah,
life if that was where I lived.
it's
Um,
a pretty terrifying thing to wake up to. I mean, you woke up to a shadow figure, and that was pretty scary, but like just an eyeball floating above you, I don't even know.
yeah, I can make sense of shadow people, not so much that. As is often the case in this podcast, when someone mentions a concept or an idea that may not be part of the mainstream, I try when I can to give a context, and Archangels is one of those things. Mainly because if you come from a Christian background, you probably have heard that word before, but you most likely have not heard the name Metatron before, unless you are a Kevin Smith fan, in which case you've seen Dogma, and that name's in Dogma. But as far as popular culture goes, that's kind of probably going to be the biggest reference you will have come across. Um, so in the quote canonical quote Christian Bible, there are four mentioned. That is not one of them. There are at least three more within mainstream Judaism. I believe Metatron is one of those. There is a book, a very, very ancient book called the Book of Tobit, Tobit, that mentions, I believe, Metatron. I have not read this book, but it is canonical to someone, I'm sure, but definitely not Christianity, and probably not the majority of Judaism, but that would be speaking from silence for me, so I'm not entirely sure. Um,
So, in my work in the Akashic Records, Metatron is considered to be like the scribe of the Akashic Records, so kind of like the energy force that is holding all of that energetic information. And so what Aaron was referencing is that when I've been in the Akashic Records and I have been like in meditation, there has been times where I've seen a giant, just singular eyeball. So I think that's what she's talking about. And to me, it's always happened at a time where like I'm expanding consciousness and I'm kind of vibrating at a different level and getting really deep insights into something. So I don't know if there's any similarities between what I experienced and what she experienced. I think it's interesting that, this happened to her when she was waking up. Um, you know, I think you're in a different state of consciousness when you're sleeping, so there might be something there, but I don't know. It definitely I can I mean for me, like being in the records and seeing that in meditation, it's not as terrifying. I mean, the first time it happened, it was a little weird. I will be honest with you, having just like seeing this giant eyeball in your mind's eye. But
for sure.
yeah, it doesn't have the same feeling as like waking up and seeing it with your eyes open, looming over you.
Yeah,
So if that was a spiritual being, get a different way of sending a message, please. Thanks.
yeah, definitely. Another kind of note looking back to what I was saying. Um, I do know that there is part of the Kabbalah, the actual traditional Hebrew Kabbalah, that does have to do with very much with archangels, but also with Metatron. It's part of that. I don't know if the Kabbalah tradition and the Akashic Records tradition are connected to one another or not. That'd be something I'd be interested to find more out about, because they're both long-standing things that are interesting, that seem to say similar things, but I don't know if there's any real connection, like
Mhm.
on a cellular level.
Yeah. I don't know anything about Kabbalah, but it's definitely something that keeps coming up. So probably an avenue of exploration here in the near future, but very interesting story.
Well, everybody, thanks for listening again. As always, if you have any experiences, stories, thoughts, theories, anything you'd like to talk about that's just not on the beaten path, we'd be more than happy to set up an interview through, we do go through Zoom. Our contact information is going to be on your screen, but you can email us at,
Seekerandskeptic@gmail.com.
or you can find us on Facebook and Blue Sky and Twitter and Instagram.
Instagram. Yep.
Instagram. Yep. Just search our name and you will find us.
Yeah. Happy Halloween, everyone. I hope you guys have a wonderful and spooky day. And thanks for being with us.
See you guys.
Bye.